Well, now that the Nationals are out in their opposition to Labor's proposed voice to the Parliament, at the end of this final sitting week, slipped into the Parliament today without much fanfare was the machinery legislation that needs to pass in order for there to be a voice referendum next year. Now, it might sound benign, given it's not the bill that has the actual referendum question in it. That bill's still to come. But a benign bill, this is not. I'm still working my way through the detail, but straight away there's a few things that deserve your attention. One, this bill seeks to do away with the current law that says a yes and a no pamphlet must be sent to all voters by the Australian Electoral Commission. Now, the law as it stands says each pamphlet is supposed to outline the argument for the referendum and the argument against it, and be sent to everyone who will vote to better inform them. Now, that's gone if this bill introduced today passes. And given the Albanese government is also refusing to fund a public media yes campaign and a no campaign, the only information then that voters will get will be what the big corporates or others pay for on TV, radio, newspapers, and of course on social media. Now, you can see what this changes, doesn't it? It helps silence any opposition to the voice. But there's more. The bill introduced today also seeks a temporary lift to a funding restriction so the government can use taxpayer dollars to fund what it calls educational initiatives to counter misinformation. Now, I read that as taxpayer funding to push the yes vote with no detail on what will constitute so-called misinformation. Does anything Jacinta Price say against the voice, for example, qualify as misinformation? Does the views of the National Party in opposing the voice qualify as misinformation? Does that then give Linda Burney, let's say, the power to use taxpayer millions to try and shut down the National Party's arguments, or those of Jacinta Price, against the voice? Now, hard to know because the bill's as clear as mud as to what constitutes misinformation, or even what's meant by educational or community education in the legislation. We already know that in the recent budget, $75 million was set aside to run this referendum and, I presume, also fund this so-called community education. But what does it all really mean? What form will it take? We know, as confirmed yesterday too by Linda Burney, that the Albanese government has formally ruled out, via a decision of Cabinet, not to fund a yes or a no campaign. But it will use your money for this so-called community education. Now, see that for what it is, a way to backdoor a pro-voice campaign without having to fund fairly the alternative view. And then there's this legislation that quietly passed the Parliament yesterday, barely picked up in the media, to give a tax deductibility status to an organisation called Australians for Indigenous Constitutional Recognition Limited. Now that this has passed, this legislation, it'll mean this pro-voice lobby group will get tax deductibility or your taxpayer-funded support for donations made to support the yes vote. All very sneaky, and yet again, for one of the most important decisions Australians will face, no level playing field.